Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. Social Security is still an important part of any retirement plan. It acts as a good supplement to a pension or other income from IRAs or 401ks. But how it fits into your particular plan and when is also important. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with financial planner and Social Security guru Devin Carroll about how to make the right choices when you're a few years out and when you're ready to walk out the door and go home for good. My guest today is Devin Carroll, a financial planner who just loves to nerd out on Social Security retirement benefits and share what he's learned with others on his YouTube channel and his blog. Every month, more than 1 million people watch his videos and read his articles. Welcome to the show, Devin.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to give you another chance to nerd out about Social Security. I know at my age, uh, I'm about to have to do something. I'm coming up on turning 65 next year, so I've got that 3 months before and that 3 months after, or well, that's Medicare. But and then deciding when I'm going to make a claim
Yeah.
for Social Security. So I think that I guess the listeners for this show that would be most interested would be people that are maybe 4 or 5 years out from retirement. They're starting to look to see, okay, I can start seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. Your count of the years or even the months or the weeks. But you start thinking maybe I ought to look at Social Security and what I should be doing with it, what the best strategy is. And of course, the
Yeah.
first question is as you approach, well, when do I claim Social Security? Do I do it at
Yeah.
62, at 65, at 67? Do I grab it now? Do I wait later so I get more of a benefit? Uh, how do you help people? And what is your recommendation on how they should decide when to put in a claim and start collecting?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that is probably the question that I get most often when people ask me about this.
Hmm.
And, you were talking about the people when they start thinking about retiring, they start going out and doing some research and looking at this. And that is often where the confusion seems to start, right? You,
Hmm.
you might think you have a good idea before that. And then you start reading all of these different opinions, many of them conflicting opinions.
Right.
And you think, well, this makes sense, but this does too. But they are in direct opposition to each other.
Hmm.
So having to make that decision that is right for you and your individual circumstances is not always an easy decision. And what I tell people is that it really goes back to a number of factors, right? We do this webinar about once a month, and we'll have a few hundred people join it where we go through these different factors and talk about,
Hmm.
how to choose that right age for yourself. And you certainly have the things like your own health, your marital history. Do you have any children, whether they are still minors or maybe disabled adult children at home? All of those factors certainly come into the decision. But then you have things like your assets and income. That's a big factor in determining when you should file. So, what we often find is that individuals will have, say, they have their retirement savings and they are leaving their job at 62.
Hmm.
So, that big decision comes in. Do we go ahead and file for Social Security? That way, we don't have to take as much out of our retirement savings. Or do we wait about filing for Social Security? And that means that we're probably going to have to dip in a little heavier to our retirement savings.
Hmm.
And there's that big trade off that's there, really for anyone that's retiring before 70. And that is, do I minimize Social Security and take it earlier than I may have to, or do I maximize Social Security and maybe by virtue of maximizing it, which means waiting, then I know I'm going to be minimizing my retirement savings. So it really comes back to creating a plan. an income plan, whether you do that on your own or you do it with the help of a financial planner that can give you very clear data that you can look at, you can understand, and you can arrive at that point of confidence to know this is the right age for me.
Mhm.
And, I often tell people, Stephen, that retirement planning and making these sorts of decisions is really only about one half data. And the other half gets a little dangerous because that's how we feel about the data. I tell people the story quite often of my house that I refinanced. The co-host of my podcast, John, called me one day and said, Devin, look, I just refinanced my house and I got this crazy rate. If you want some of that, you need to call this lady at this bank. So I did. And we refinanced my house at 1.85%. To this day, I've yet to meet anyone else that got a lower rate than that. On paper, it does not make any sense at all to pay that house off early.
Mhm.
We've got money market funds now that are at 5%. Why would we pay a house off that's at 1.85%? Well, that's the data side of the decision, right?
Mhm.
When we look at something, we have a spreadsheet, it's laid out, and it makes perfect sense to have that money in a money market or in a CD or in the market, whatever it is, and not to take that money out of something that's paying more than what we're paying in interest. But
Mhm.
there's the emotional side of it. And that's the side where my wife's coming to me saying, I don't care. I understand the numbers. I'm good with math. I've seen your spreadsheets, Devin. I want a paid off house. That's the part of the planning that's really difficult for us nerds and number crunchers to be able to impose on people. We can't tell people how they should feel. What we have to do is give people data that's crystal clear so they can look at this and come to those decisions for themselves.
And sometimes paying it off, you have that you no longer have a mortgage payment, so now you're just paying taxes and insurance. So you have a smaller retirement budget because you no longer have the mortgage payment, and
Right?
how much that may offset some other factors. But you
Yeah.
mentioned as far as the choice, you're going to wait to claim Social Security, that might be a drain on other retirement savings. You're taking more money out of your Roth IRA, for example, than you might have otherwise if you had claimed Social Security now because you have that stream of income. But what if you do what my wife and I are doing, which is our retirement date is in alignment with our Social Security claim date. So we're both working until we're the age we want to claim. So number one, you're not pulling money from other sources to supplement your income because you're still working. And also, don't you also have that work history with Social Security so that you continue to paying into Social Security as you're working, or for me, a self-employment tax or contribution, so that when you retire, you're retiring based on a benefit calculation that has a longer work history, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, what you're doing there, Stephen, is making the perfect case for having a plan,
Yeah,
right? It sounds like it's a strategic, well thought out decision,
right.
which I'm always a fan of.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to line up with exactly the way I'm going to suggest doing it all of the time.
Mhm.
But as long as it's something that you've put some thought into, or you've hired someone to help you put some thought into, I'm a big fan of it.
Mhm.
Right. And so it certainly sounds like that with your plan, when you're going to exit. And that also happens to be the time when you are going to file for Social Security. Now, it doesn't have to work that way, right? People
Right.
can retire earlier and file later. I've seen some people who have filed earlier than they have retired. And there are certain narrow circumstances where that could make sense as well. But, we do have to uncouple those dates and realize they don't have to happen at the same time, but sometimes they do, especially for an individual like yourself or someone else that's self employed, when you have that flexibility to be able to schedule everything together like that.
Mhm. Well, it's also, we're looking at it just that all the planets happen to align for us. We're a very fortunate situation in which, uh, with my wife waiting until she's 67, if she waits to claim and retires, then she will also max out her pension. She's a federal employee.
Perfect.
So she maxes his three highest earning years, and she will have had 3 full calendar years at her highest income level by the time she retires and then claims Social Security. So she's getting her maximum Social Security benefit, she's getting her maximum pension. And because I'm younger than she is, she can't retire until I turn 65 because our insurance is with her employer.
Yeah.
So it all kind of works out. On top of that, the previous uh, federal agency she was with before we got married was the Social Security Administration.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
she has that body of knowledge. She's way out of date, I'm sure, on a lot of this stuff because we were married a long time, but a lot of it hasn't changed, and she has a good understanding of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of things to consider, and talk to a financial planner about when's the best time to make that claim.
Well,
And
here,
you
let me interject something there, Stephen, if I
yeah, yeah,
could. Let me tell you one of the problems, though, in the industry. The financial planning industry is one that I'm very familiar with. I've been doing that professionally now for I'm in my 21st year, depending on how you measure it, maybe even 22nd year of doing that. And I can tell you there's a lot of rules of thumb and conventional wisdom that's applied. Furthermore, there's a lot of retirement software that is relied heavily on where the individuals using that software have never fully understood the output that's coming out of it. So when you're looking at, uh, the big, there's three big retirement planning software companies out there that make their programs available to financial advisors and almost exclusively to financial advisors. They've priced themselves to the point where it's not really feasible for either the price or the learning curve it takes to use it for that to be a consumer level type of software.
right.
And all three of those do a very simple break even calculation over on the side to determine your optimal Social Security filing age.
Mhm,
And then they take that and overlay it on top of all your other assets and income.
mhm,
And I say that's an awful way to approach Social Security.
mhm,
Uh, looking at it in its own little vacuum over here and saying that, well, here's the right age to file for Social Security based on no other factors except your health, your longevity, how long you think you're going to live. And oh, if you live to 95, here's the way you can get the most in benefits. And the answer is always file at 70. But when you instead kind of undo some of those built-in assumptions that software has, and you start doing some of that testing on your own, you may start to find that the results coming out of that don't match the uh, the software and what they are suggesting. Let me give you an example. We've been doing a lot of testing here lately uh, on what happens if we get into another period of market returns like we had from 2000 to 2023. It was a very interesting time in the market, right? So
mhm,
we're making some assumptions that someone had gotten all of the big returns from 1980 is the date that we're using, all the way up to the end of 1999, and they were so happy with their results that they decided to retire. And then in the first 3 years of retirement, they saw big declines in the market. We've heard about this negative sequence of returns and how that will impact you. And this is as close as I can find to the perfect real world test of a negative sequence of returns.
mhm,
Now, that's kind of getting into the world of investment returns. And if you're just looking at that, doing some stress testing, and you're still just overlaying filing at 70 for Social Security benefits on top of that, it doesn't actually tell you the whole story. Because if you look at a couple that's retiring at 62, and if we assume those same string of returns is going to happen to them as happened from 2000 to 2023, It
Mm,
was just happens to be enough to take you from 62 all the way out to age 85. If you file at 70, you're going to take those larger distributions in those first years because you don't have Social Security coming in to pad that.
mhm,
And with the time value of money, because you're taking out more in those first few years, you're going to see those balances decline a little sharper, which means that those same returns that came back aren't going to bring it back up as far.
mhm,
Whereas the filing at 62, throughout the entirety of that period, it left you with a higher balance in your retirement savings. So a lot of people like to talk about filing later is good longevity insurance, and it's usually best for a number of reasons, and there are some reasons that filing later is absolutely the best decision, but it's not always best, and sometimes it's not best for the reasons that people say it's the best. When
mhm,
I can point back to a negative sequence of returns and show you how filing for Social Security earlier would have given you better protection against that, I think that ought to raise some eyes and make people realize that this is something that's going to require lots and lots of testing to figure out which scenario gives you the highest level of comfort.
mhm. So a lot goes into deciding when to make the claim for Social Security. But before they do that, uh, what are some of the things that the listeners should know about their benefits before they retire?
You know, let me just hit one of the big mistakes that I think a lot of people make in those years before they retire. And
Mhm,
it's very simple. This is easy to fix, thankfully.
mhm,
And that is not checking your earnings record every year.
mhm,
We've seen countless mistakes in an earnings record. Now, I'm talking about individuals who worked at the same job for 30 years. They started there 3 decades ago, and right in the middle of that time, there were 2 years showing a zero in earnings. Now, how did that happen? What happened there? And they didn't catch it. And now they've got to come up and produce some documentation to go back to the Social Security Administration and show them that, hey, I actually did earn money in these years and I need these earnings included in my calculation. And so they make you jump through some hoops. Sometimes it's not quite that easy just to go back and show them, especially if you don't have your tax records. The IRS may not have them at this point. So it can be difficult to go back and show them. It's even more difficult if you work for a company that's now out of business. So I would tell people every year by August, September, the IRS should have already turned that information over to the administration. No later than November after that October 15th extension. They should have the information on your earnings and should have added that to your earnings record. And you need to go in there and you need to make sure that it was added correctly and that you are getting credit for those years because you don't want to try to fix that down the road.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. That's something my wife does. I reminded me that comes in the mail. So, oh, look, got to take a look at that. See, but
yeah,
yeah, they could be now. She works for a federal agency, but I'm sure, you know, their Office of Personnel Management may make a mistake too in talking to Social Security and recording what the income was and things like that. So yeah, that's like whenever I make a deposit at the bank and I get the return slip back, I take a look at the
right.
printout to make sure what they show the deposit was is what I hand wrote because it's easier to fix right then
Yep,
and there and say, hey, wait a minute, you made a mistake. Then you get back to the office or home and a couple you're looking at your statement, say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. And now you got to go back to the bank and fix it. So yeah,
absolutely.
keeping an eye on those benefit statements every year is important.
It certainly is. It's very important. And not
So,
only that, but Stephen, now with earnings,
mhm.
I would point out too that some of your older earnings, if there's people listening to this now going, well, my goodness, I've never thought of that. I need to go back and check all my earnings and make sure it's no longer on your benefits estimate in the way that it used to be. Now, for all of the older earnings, they're just going to truncate those and add up the sum by decade. So they'll show you all of your earnings from, say, 1980 to 1989.
Hmm.
and it'll just be one number. But you can, if you're in a MySSA account, which I hope everybody has their own account that they can go into and check all of this. You can go down about midway, right in the center. There should be a link that says to look at a detailed copy of your earnings or something like that, where you can click that, and that will show you a year by year summary of all of your taxed earnings for Social Security.
Hmm. Well, that's a good resource. Yeah, and you're right. That's another thing that people should be aware of as they approach, or even no matter what the age of the person, whether they're just graduated college, have their first job, or whether they're a few years out from retirement. Set up an account with the Social Security Administration and make sure that everything is being reported properly, and as part of your overall financial plan, you can see where you are as far as
Yeah.
work history and earnings records and things like that. So that that's as much a part of your retirement portfolio as looking at your IRA statements, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, that's one mistake you said that people don't check that every year. What would you say are some of the other mistakes that people make with Social Security before they retire?
Yeah, before they retire, there's not a lot that you can screw up because so many of those things are automated, right? Your earnings go in, the Social Security Administration handles that. So as long as you're checking your earnings and you're making sure that those earnings are being added correctly,
Hmm.
thankfully, there's not a whole lot of other things that you can mess up in there. But I'll tell you one of the things that I have seen, and this is kind of not necessarily before retirement, but I would say it's maybe before the first retirement.
Hmm.
What we find quite often is that people will retire, they'll leave their job. Not everybody loves their job, and I get that. And so, as soon as they get to the chance where they think they can retire, some people do.
Hmm.
Well, then they go home and they're home for a year and they either run out of honeydews or they find out that this is just going to be a long list of honeydews. I need to go back to work. They may have filed for Social Security. Then they go back to work and they forget to let the Social Security Administration know. And there is a limit on the earnings that you can have if you are below full retirement age and you're receiving Social Security benefits.
Hmm.
Now, here's the problem with that. It's a fairly simple thing that normally the Social Security Administration is going to catch it. They're going to come back to you and say, "Hey, we're going to turn your benefits off from this month to this month because you were over the limit." Easy, but those are the easy cases. The ones that are much more difficult is when they don't catch it for 7, 8 years,
Oh.
and then they send you an overpayment notice. And I have helped a lot of people with those overpayment notices. I don't even do it anymore because they are so convoluted. I've seen people get 2 overpayment notices on the same day alleging different overpayment amounts.
Huh.
And it's just a mess. So if you are going to go back to work after you have filed for Social Security and you are under full retirement age, you need to file a work report with the administration and let them know. Tell them, I'm going back to work. I want you to stop my benefits.
Okay. Yeah, because you're only going to end up paying it back or having a problem later on.
And maybe not agreeing with their math on paying it back.
Yeah, exactly. So, mistakes that people make in claiming Social Security. So you're making your claim. You decide, okay, I'm going to start receiving benefits. What are some of the mistakes that people make in claiming Social Security benefits?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think number one, relying on conventional wisdom, and that's for the people who like to plan, right? The
Mhm.
people who are planners, and maybe they haven't gone through all the steps to test it out. They just maybe they look at the data and they say, well, it says that I should wait until 70, therefore I'm going to wait until 70. And I've come across a fair number of people who, and maybe I get exposure to these people because of the technical services that we offer, but I have found a fair number of people who are retired and still have children at home. And sometimes those are disabled adult children, but I've ran into a good number of those who are saying that, yeah, I'm going to wait until 70 to file so I can get the highest benefit. And, that is a problem for sure because, there's a rule that says before any auxiliary can receive a benefit off of your work record, if you're the higher earner, you have to file. And so if you are filing, or if you are waiting to file for benefits, rather, that means that everyone else who could receive benefits from your work record is also being forced to wait. And that's not always the best move to make.
Mhm.
The other one would be filing too early. And we probably see this more often. There's the whole idea once you retire that, wait a minute, I've got this money that's just sitting there with my name on it. When you are 10 years out, you think, yeah, I'll wait till I file. But when you're a year out, you start thinking, I don't know, in a year I could get it. And, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? And you start thinking, well, I could just go ahead and file. And everybody's talking about Social Security is going to go bankrupt anyway. And maybe I better get what I can while I can.
Mhm.
And you file early for benefits. Now, that's not always a problem. Sometimes it is best to file early, but I can tell you that in a lot of circumstances, it's not best. And a good example of that is my wife's grandmother. Her husband, Neil, he was a truck driver, delivered gasoline all over the southern part of the United States. And by the time he hit 62, he was tired. He was tired of working, tired of driving. The regulations were increasing. And, it wasn't just the good old cowboy days of truck driving anymore. And he said, that's it. I'm going to park the truck and sell the Peterbilt and I'm retiring. And when he did, he filed for Social Security. Well, he lived for several more years, probably a good 15 years, but then he passed away. And his wife, who had been a homemaker, took care of, in the early days, they were farmers and then she was raising kids. She didn't have a benefit of her own, which means that she just got Neil's benefit. And it wasn't enough. I could tell you that an extra $400 or $500 that she could have received if he would have been more strategic,
Mhm.
it would have made all the difference in the world to her lifestyle and just being able to meet her daily needs too. So it's very situational when you file, but you shouldn't just go out and file because you can, and you shouldn't just wait until 70 because that's what the latest, US News article said.
Exactly. So we've covered the mistakes that people tend to make when they're claiming Social Security. Let's circle back to an earlier question I started to ask, which is, what are some of the things that people should know about their Social Security benefits before they retire?
Yeah. So there's a few things. Number one, understanding how the actual increases to your own benefit will work or decreases for
Mhm.
filing early. Understanding that it's actually calculated on a monthly basis. We're so used to getting these Social Security statements that show the, a band of years, right? So at 62, you can receive this. At 67, you can receive this. At 70, this. But that's actually on a monthly adjustment.
Mhm.
So you don't have to wait until a calendar year is starting or your birthday to file for benefits. They're going to be reduced or increased based on that month that you file. Now, there is a weird rule in there that one of your listeners will probably call me out on and say, no, that's not the way it works if you're over full retirement age. But we won't get into that little nuance. Just know that any delayed retirement credits are not added until the following January. Interesting the way the administration does that. They could calculate reductions and apply those to a benefit immediately,
Mhm.
but increases, they say, yeah, it's too hard. So they
Ah,
make you wait until the following January.
uh,
Uh, so, so that would certainly be one of the things is just understanding that those increases and decreases are on a monthly basis. The other is understanding how a spousal or survivor benefit works.
yes.
You know, when you look at the number of lower earning spouses who are receiving part or all of their benefit as a spousal payment, it's a high number. It's a very high number. And so many people still misunderstand the way a spousal benefit is calculated.
Mhm.
And I'm hesitant in a podcast format like this that's audio without me being able to show some supporting visuals to get into the math of it. But at full retirement age, the lower earning spouse is entitled to one half of the higher earning spouse's full retirement age benefit. Now, that's the part that everybody knows. The part that a lot of people don't know is that that payment is actually a combination of the lower earning spouse's full retirement age benefit plus whatever it took to get that up to one half. So, for example, if the higher earning spouse has a full retirement age benefit of $3,000, the lower earning spouse has a full retirement age benefit of $1,200, she would have, or he, $300 added to that $1,200 to get it up to $1,500. Now, why does that matter? Well, it's because those are two separate payments that are rolled into one payment,
Mhm.
and both of those are increased or decreased separately based on the age you become entitled to that portion of the benefit.
Mhm.
So if people could grasp that spousal benefit, it would make a big difference. It's one of the most visited pages on my website is my spousal benefit calculator, where I let people put in their benefit amounts and then it breaks that down for them
Mhm.
because it's something that still causes lots and lots of confusion. The other part is the survivor benefit. You know, how is a survivor benefit calculated?
Mhm.
And there's a few things here to know about as well. But basically, if the higher earning spouse has already filed for benefits, the lower earning spouse's benefit is going to stop and they are going to start receiving the benefit that the higher earning spouse was receiving. If the higher earning spouse has not yet filed, then they can receive the benefit that the spouse would have received, plus any delayed retirement credits. And that would be calculated based on the full retirement age benefit of that higher earning spouse. Now, again, that's something that really needs supporting visuals to go into it, because then you have rules like the widow's limit that comes into that, where the higher or the lower earning spouse is not going to receive less than 82.5% of the higher earner's benefit if they filed early.
Mhm.
And there's a few other things to know, but I think one of the important things that I want to get across here is that there is still some switching ability with survivor's benefits that it does not exist anywhere else.
Mhm.
With the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 2015 that President Obama signed into law, it shut down a lot of the ability that people had to do the file and suspend and then restrict the scope of an application. But survivor's benefits were carved out of that for the ability to be able to restrict an application. So, for example, you could file for your own benefit as early as 62 and then switch to a survivor's benefit at full retirement age. And the inverse is also true. You could file for a survivor's benefit as early as 60 and then switch to your own benefit, which should have grown larger for waiting, at 70. And that's still available. And there was actually a report that came out from the Office of the Inspector General that found that the administration was not letting people know about this. And it was costing some survivors, widows and widowers, a lot of money in monthly benefits because they went in, just filed for their own benefits without knowing. They could have gotten a survivor's benefit for a while and then switched to their own.
Hmm. Yeah. There's so many things to consider and little calculations and things like that that the listeners out there certainly a lot to consider and something that you questions you have to ask.
Yeah.
in talking to a financial planner or Social Security or whatever, as far as what the best option is, both for individuals and married couples. So we talked about the spousal benefits and the survival benefits. How do benefits work in divorce? You don't have the death of a spouse, but the couple divorces. How do Social Security benefits work in that instance?
Yeah. So there's length of marriage rules that you have to meet
Hmm.
when you are married to someone. And the same applies if you get divorced. So as long as you were married to someone for 10 years and you are currently unmarried,
Hmm.
then you can apply for either a spousal benefit if that person is still alive or a survivor benefit if they are deceased. Again, it's just that 10-year length of marriage rule. Now, there are some exceptions to that on the survivor benefit side, but again, that's going down the rabbit hole of nuance, and there's no reason to get there in this show. But
Right.
absolutely, a survivor's, a divorced spouse benefit is something that you should not expect the administration to keep up with any prior marriages that you've had. You know, that's on you.
Right.
You need to go in and ask them, hey, I've got this prior marriage. I was married for this period of time, and here's the paperwork to prove it. That's the
Hmm.
other thing you're going to have. You know, what benefit can I receive if I wait until my full retirement age? And here's the reason I would ask that question that way. You know, if let's say that I got a divorce, well, my wife would no longer just be able to go around to different places and ask information about me if they knew I was divorced, right? It's no longer my spouse. And heck, even if she is my spouse, there's people that give her a hard time about it. So she certainly couldn't get that information if we were divorced. And the same happens at the Social Security Administration. You would think that because this benefit directly impacts you and your planning, you'd be able to call and get that information. Well, you can't. They'll say, I'm sorry, I can't give you that information. So you have to ask the question in the right way. You have to say, hey, as a spouse, if I wait until my full retirement age, how much can I receive in a spousal benefit from this person who's still alive, or in a survivor benefit from this ex spouse who is now deceased? They'll get your information and they'll give you that number. And then based on that, you can start to do the calculations forward and backwards to figure out where you need to be and where those numbers will be at different
Hmm.
ages.
Well, that's great. A lot of good information about Social Security, which is an important part of the retirement planning for a lot of folks out there. So, if people want to get in touch with you and get your assistance in doing this planning that we've been talking about, how can they get in touch with you? What type of services do you offer? How can you help folks?
Well, you know, you can always find me at my firm's website, carrolladvisory.com.
Hmm.
You can also find me on YouTube.
Hmm.
You can find me on my podcast, Big Picture Retirement. There's a number of places to find, and just about everything will have links that will drive you back somewhere, right? You can get back to my site. We have a start a conversation button on the website that will get you in touch with someone in my team, and
Hmm.
we'll schedule a time and talk about that.
All
You
right.
know, there's two main core offerings in services that we have. We do one-time planning engagements, and then we do comprehensive engagements. It's the planning plus a lot of other stuff. But yeah, we love helping people. We love giving them clarity because that clarity is what leads to confidence.
Mhm. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate all the great information about Social Security, and I'm sure we've educated the listeners on what they need to do. One of the first things is go out and, if they haven't already, create that Social Security account so you can get all that information. Make sure you're reviewing those annual statements and correcting any mistakes as they occur. And hopefully, down the road, when they're ready to claim retirement Social Security, they'll get their maximum benefit. So thanks for
Yes.
coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.